All right, well, I will try not to get too distracted as I'm trying to kind of admit people here, last minute joiners here. But I am going to start getting going with my presentation just so that we stay on time. And I've got a lot of information I want to get through today with you. So give me just one moment to make sure I've got this all sorted and we will be good to go. Okay, well, tonight we're talking about biohacking and how we can help unlock your health potential. So a lot of this are going to be tips of things that you can do yourself at home. Then we're going to also talk about how we can work with patients in the office as well. But you'll have an opportunity to see some of the slides, hear some of the presentation again after as well. So in case you feel you missed something, don't worry, you'll get a second look at it. But first off, just to introduce myself. So I am Dr. Alex Chan. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a naturopathic doctor at Integrative Naturopathic Medical Center in Vancouver. I also co-founded a natural electrolyte sports drink company called Hydrate. And I'm from a family of long-standing kind of alternative health practitioners. I actually get to work with my dad and sister, who are both also naturopathic doctors. And then my mom also was a RMT as I was growing up. So lots of good kind of background for me. I also identify as a biohacker. So I do a lot of what I'm talking about tonight. I practice what I preach. And I am interested in it both for my patients, but also really for myself, because I think that health optimization we've got so many tools available to us now, and it's really exciting to be able to start using them and learning them and be able to really enjoy the benefits of those things for ourselves as well. So let's talk a little bit about what you're going to learn tonight and what you're going to see on my end. I want to first familiarize you with what the term biohacking actually means and explain why biohacking is actually a part of naturopathic medicine. There's going to be some pieces that I'll talk about that you'll see there's actually a really natural fit between these two, and some points where there's actually a bit of contention. We're going to introduce what I've dubbed the integrative pillars of biohacking, review some specific ways that you can actually biohack yourself, and then discuss what sets the integrative biohacking program apart by sharing some patient stories. So there's definitely things you can do by yourself at home, and there's still some places where I think that having a medical expert or working with someone can really be helpful. So let's look at the history of biohacking to start. So where did this all come from? Well, biohacking, the term itself comes from and describes this concept of do-it-yourself biology. It's been around since around the 1980s is when they started throwing this term around. And I think it really came about because people started having easier access to testing like personal genomic sequencing and functional DNA analysis. They started being able to actually order things for themselves and not be solely reliant on going to a physician to kind of get that expertise and get that blood work done. So people had a better sense of empowerment. We started seeing more traction in the early 2000s, especially in San Francisco and Silicon Valley as the tech community took off. They began gamifying and quantifying what our bodies can do and all of the aspects of physical, mental, and emotional performance. In 2005, there was an article by a man named Rob Carlson. He wrote an article that said, "The era of the garage biology is upon us. Want to participate? Take a moment and buy yourself a lab on eBay." So kind of a tongue-in-cheek way of thinking, okay, is this as good as what the doctor can give you, or can you actually start really just doing it yourself? And we started seeing more conferences about biohacking showing up in the 2010s. Now there are a couple conferences that happen annually, and there are a couple major figures in the biohacking world. So all of this aside, what is biohacking? We can really see it as a series of practices which change your biology and chemistry. These are usually targeted in a couple of key areas, focusing on energy, increasing cognition, functional performance, and longevity. we see this as a development, as a movement against conventional medicine in some ways, or at least the disease model of healthcare. It's almost a DIY bio movement to revise the idea that you have to be a doctor in order to understand your own body. It allows people to feel empowered and make their own decisions that impact their health. And it harnesses technology to actually improve health markers. Nowadays, we almost take it for granted the amount of information we can get from apps and other things like this that actually give us quantifiable data about what we can do about our health. Things like fitness trackers and sleep trackers are, so easily and inexpensively available. And it really takes a proactive approach to learning about things that are often associated with aging. I always say that biohacking really exists on two key principles. One, that we can engineer our bodies to feel better, and two, we can actually do something about it right now. So those two pieces are generally outside the normal scope of traditional medicine, and they mean that we actually can make changes that within our lifetime, in a short, measurable period of time, we'll be able to track out those changes. Who are some of the key people in the biohacking world? This is a short list. There are many more. Pictured there, you see Dave Asprey and Rhonda Patrick, but just a couple of the many people that have talked about biohacking. There are some like Dave Asprey that are trying to live to, oh gosh, I think he's at 160 is his goal age right now. I'm not sure if we'll actually live to see if it happens or not, but and then others that more speak about certain types of diets, or Wim Hof that really is promoting ice therapy and cold exposure, which I will have a spotlight on later as well. So next, I want to look a little bit at naturopathic principles and how they fit in with biohacking. First off, these are the main principles of naturopathic medicine. These are the tenets that, as a student and as a medical professional, I try to practice by. The first, the healing power of nature. That really believes that our bodies do have an innate capacity to heal and an innate desire to actually self-better and self-heal. Second, identifying and actually treating the cause. So this is getting to the root of the disease. So not giving us a Band-Aid solution, but actually identifying why something's happening. And then that gives us information on how we can address it or do something about it. First, doing no harm. So this is important in regards to choosing the treatment that we want to do or the intervention that we want to do, making sure that that treatment doesn't actually potentially have more risks than benefits. It, from my standpoint, uses the doctor's teacher. I mean, this webinar is a great example of kind of a naturopathic principle there that I take very near and dear to my heart. We want to treat the whole person. So not looking at one part of the body as more important or as unique above all others. We want to focus on prevention. So prevention is key. Let's try and identify what's happening with the system before it's at a disease level, when maybe we're seeing a complaint or some early symptomatology, but it hasn't developed to the point where we're actually getting a diagnosis, we're getting a major health crisis. And then wellness as well. So really focusing on that prevention, and then overall, okay, not just prevent disease. How do we actually make you feel your most optimal, well, and healthy self? Here are some of the spotlights on the shared philosophies. So you can see that on the left-hand side there, our bodies have the power to support and overcome disease. That's a shared philosophy between naturopathic medicine and biohacking. We want to identify that root cause. We want to treat not just individual parts of the body, but the mind, body, and spirit, and that focus on prevention and wellness. On the other hand, I definitely think that there are a couple of differing philosophies. There's this idea of do it yourself, or do you actually talk to a medical professional? Do you listen to the body, or are you more focused on listening to technology? And then that piece I was mentioning about first doing no harm, does over intervention or early intervention do more harm than good? There are some extreme interventions that there's a subset of biohackers that identify themselves as grinders, not really something that I'm a fan of or promote. Grinders will oftentimes do implanted technology. So early cutting edge technology maybe hasn't been studied in humans, like RFID tags, things that are implanted that maybe push us to the level of like man versus machine, or are they merging into one? Maybe these interventions aren't actually fitting in the scope of naturopathic medicine. And then also, when you're looking at some of these early interventions, there might not be as much scientific evidence. So how much is experimenting and how much is actually coming down to evidence-based medicine? Like I said, biohacking does believe in the power of the body to support and overcome disease. We really focus on getting to the core of what's wrong and recognizing that there is that interplay between different aspects. So I think we need to kind of balance some of those different pieces and figure out what the right fit is when it comes to a focus on naturopathic medicine and biohacking. But I do think that there is a natural fit. We just have to sometimes find that balance. Looking at the goals of treatment, I think the shared goals are prevention and wellness are where naturopathic medicine excels, and health optimization is a clear focus for biohacking. The next piece I want to segue into is the pillars of biohacking. And you'll see that I talk about this in 6 major pillars. We'll go through a couple of different sections. The first one being sleep, second one being movement, third, mindfulness, fourth, nourishment, fifth, community, and sixth, biochemistry. And not that surprisingly, you'll see that as we get down to number 6, biochemistry, that's where I really feel like working with a professional can take your experience with biohacking to the next level. So let's dive right in here. Let's look at how you hack your lifestyle using these pillars of biohacking. All right. Stress management is the first area that I want to talk about. So it shouldn't come as much of a surprise that in periods of high intense stress, we see that stress is actually an important modulator of our nervous system, and our bodies should be able to properly respond to all of these signals. Where we run into problems is that our modern society is really built on chronic stress, not that acute stress that you can recover from, but instead chronic stress that's disruptive and taxing to our bodies long term. We're under this kind of continual load, which creates a host of different issues. What are these forms of stress that I'm talking about? These are only a couple. There's many other ones, I'm sure, but that you can think of. First of all, physical stress. Sleep deprivation is rampant in North American culture, as is inappropriate nutrition and diet choices and chronic inflammation. Chemical stresses from whether that's environmental stress, drug choices, alcohol use, pollution from living in a modern society, exposures to other pesticides, toxins, things that you're exposed to also through your food or through cleaning agents in your house and what have you. Emotional and spiritual stress from past traumas, unresolved emotions, and troubled relationships. And then mental stress from work, finances, and a host of other concerns. This stress has several different interactions. So I'm going to talk about something here called the HPA axis and the stress response. So in our brain, we have something called the hypothalamus. This is the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. So our brain in the hypothalamus, it releases a certain type of hormone that signals the pituitary gland. That's like the second in line. And that pituitary gland then releases another signal that goes to our adrenal glands. And this is kind of the stress hormone cascade. So chronic stressors can really disrupt this axis because what happens is that the adrenals are actually the site of where we produce cortisol, norepinephrine, and epinephrine. Those signals kind of start lighting up and they have a host of different responses downstream in our body. We should normally damp down those 3, cortisol, norepinephrine, and epinephrine. And as they drop, then we see this negative feedback loop and the HPA axis downregulates. Our brain is like, okay, we're not so stressed anymore. We can calm down. The problem is that if you are constantly stressed, the adrenals are constantly pumping out that cortisol. And as that's happening, you're constantly having that upregulation. The axis kind of gets burnt out and it keeps overfiring. This has many impacts on something called the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous systems. So, the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems are two different sides of the nervous system, and they're equally important, but we tend to do a lot more activities that drive what's called sympathetic nervous system tone rather than parasympathetic nervous system tone. Sympathetic nervous system tone is all of that fight or flight response. So if you are constantly in that sympathetic dominance, we might have brain fog, fatigue, lowered mood, and we can feel that kind of constantly wired and tired or burnt out feeling. If that fight or flight nervous system is working as it should, we respond to stress, we ramp up that sympathetic, and then as we're able to calm down, we engage the parasympathetic. That's our rest, digest, relax response. And everything starts to kind of calm down, we recover, our heart rate returns to normal, our blood pressure returns to normal, and we're able to actually promote more of this parasympathetic activity through lifestyle changes and specific techniques. So this is where we really jump into how important this stress management is. So the first biohacking pillar is mindfulness. Mindfulness is so important. Like I said, it's one of the key things we can do to really balance out that stress nervous system axis and how that's all interacting together. There are so many different forms of mindfulness that it's also should be okay to find a form that will work for you. Here I've listed a couple of different categories that I've seen to be particularly useful. I also have this list of breathwork activities just because it gives you all these different types of breathing techniques that you can use that all do slightly different things, but do work with our nervous system balance, work with vagal nerve tone. One of the ones that's actually really straightforward to do, and I practice myself most nights, is something called mouth taping. So really easy technique. You want to get usually a 3M porous sticky tape from the drugstore, the medical tape. You just take a small piece, put it over the center of the lips. Doesn't have to cover the whole mouth. And this is obviously allowing that you have good nasal flow. You're able to breathe in and out through your nose well. But keeping the mouth shut and the lips shut at night really promotes this nasal breathing. Nasal breathing is much more relaxing and calming for our nervous system. It also produces a better ratio of oxygen and carbon dioxide in our bodies as well. So you get a better gas ratio of how your body is responding to breathing. And with that taping, it also can relax some of the muscles in your jaw. So if you find yourself clenching at bedtime or have complaints of snoring from your bed partner, I actually really like mouth taping. Some of the other things here are more complicated breathing techniques. You know, I put qigong under meditation, but some people would consider it a form of breath work as well. It does have aspects of that. And then different forms of journaling. So hopefully you can look at one of these tools and figure out how it can fit in with your life, remembering that doing some sort of mindfulness practice is the key. Having an ability to do that with some regularity makes a big difference. Also, we see that as we go forward here, the second biohacking pillar I really want to focus on when it comes to stress management is sleep. And sleep is critical for all aspects of health and controlling immune hormone, stress, brain function. The list is endless on how important good quality sleep is. But sleep deprivation, which many people in our society are constantly running under a sleep deprived state, it can raise our cortisol levels. It can actually lead to brain damage. So the takeaway being most people are undersleeping and you really should focus on sleeping. One quick point I want to make about meditation, especially when it comes to sleep, there are different types of sleep meditation, but oftentimes having a meditation practice that you do earlier in the day can actually promote better restful sleep in the nighttime versus some people think that to sleep better, they should meditate right before bedtime. And that's actually a little bit of a misnomer. The second piece being that when you start any new practice, whether it's changing sleep routine or starting a meditation practice, you may actually notice that you feel more stressed or more anxious first before you actually start feeling better. And this is totally normal. It's kind of like if you started a new exercise regime, you might notice that you feel that it's kind of hard or it's really tiring. It actually has been shown to increase anxiety when people are starting a new meditation routine. About 15 to 20% of people might feel more anxious at the beginning as their body learns a new technique. So don't expect that immediately when you'll start, you'll feel better right away. Sometimes it is that old adage that practice takes perfect, or practice makes perfect. All right. In terms of sleep, this is a fun quiz that you can look at doing. It's a free online quiz. It's called The Power of When, and you can find it at thepowerofwhenquiz.com. It's the work of Dr. Michael Breus, and he looked at a couple of different things called chronobiology. So he saw that in his sleep work, there tended to be 4 different types of people in terms of how they best slept and woke up. These different 4 animal types are bear types, which is it's the 9 to 5. It's what our society is built on, and this is the majority of people, about 50%. And we track our day with the rise and fall of the sun. The second type are more of our typical early morning risers. That's the lion type. The third type is the wolf, or the kind of late night people. And then the last unfortunate folks are the 10% of that are dolphins, or more poor sleepers across the board. Why I recommend you do the quiz and take a look at this yourself is that depending on what your chronobiological type is, he has some recommendations on what that means the best time for you to do certain tasks are, when your focus might be strongest, when you might want to look at exercising. And I found that these can provide some really helpful insights into how you're doing and how you could optimize your sleep better. 3 simple changes for better sleep. Go to bed at the same time each night, ideally before around 10:30, although that depends a little bit on your chronobiological type. Ensure activity and some light movement has occurred during the day, and avoid eating too late and trying to make lunch the largest meal of the day. So you're not having a full belly, you're not struggling with heartburn, or really focusing on digesting as you are actually trying to sleep. Another thing which always we come back to and talk about, trying to avoid really stressful things before bedtime, excess blue light, TV time, that type of thing makes a big difference as well. So let's move into the second area of big focus: exercise and movement. So this is biohacking pillar number 3, movement. Humans are designed to move to just move throughout their days. But most people spend at least 7 hours sitting per day, and the average American spends approximately 11 and a half hours per day being sedentary. So that sedentary time might be both work and non-work times, watching TV, commuting, in front of the computer or mobile device. Movement is essential for overall health. So I invite you, encourage you that if you are watching this presentation, you want to get up and do some air squats, please go for it, because constant movement throughout the day and definitely spacing that movement can be really important. On the flip side of not moving enough, when it comes to the biohacking population, sometimes I see that people can suffer from overtraining. So it's the kind of weekend warrior type of person that is just overdoing it. Or if you notice that after you have a really hard workout, you actually feel worse, more tired, your body's not recovering, you've got a lot of joint pain, delayed muscle onset soreness, that DOMS. This could be that you're not actually giving yourself enough time for active recovery. Things like walking, stretching, yoga, rolling, that can be equally as important as that intense movement. Weight training is something I really want to spotlight because, as a lot of us know, as we get older, our muscles tend to get smaller and weaker as we age. Weight training seems to be one of the best ways of maintaining a healthy physique, and genes that are downregulated that have to do with muscle tone can actually be upregulated with the correct types of exercises. So there was a 2007 study that showed that progressive weight resistance training over 6 months made the gene expression of aging mitochondria appear to be younger. So that's actually mitochondria, the energy parts of the cell. They looked younger after doing 6 months of some resistance training. This study was actually done in men age 70, and their strength improved about 50% over that period of time. Weight training is also important because after age 30, we lose on average about 6 pounds of muscle mass per decade. So that's almost a half pound of muscle per year after the age of 30 that we just start losing that muscle density and muscle mass. Strength training can be critical to help prevent aging, as well as helping to prevent a host of different diseases: stroke, cancer, diabetes, you name it. The big disease risks can really be prevented through weight training and maintaining good muscle tone. Interestingly, we see that fast twitch muscle fibers develop during strength training, and that these are the fibers that actually help you burn fat better. There was an NIHIS study that showed that older adults who engaged in strength training at least 2 times a week, so not excessively, just kind of, 2 times a week, they had a 46% lower odds of death for any reason than those that didn't. Amongst that, they also saw that there was a 41% lower odds of death from specifically cardiac and heart issues, and a 19% lower odds from dying of cancer. So some really good reasons to get lifting some heavy weights. Sometimes people ask me about endurance training, and it's a mixed bag. I do think that doing some cardio is important, but excess cardio can actually create a state of extreme, what's called metabolic efficiency. So we want to actually limit our extended intense endurance training sessions and instead focus on kind of shorter bursts. So high intensity interval training will help increase metabolism, increase muscle building, and help to manage insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. We see that during endurance training, we can get a preference for shedding muscle and storing our fat for later use. So more long-term cardio is better used for people who are just starting to be more active, or for those who are overweight. So like I said, replace that extended cardio session with more high intensity interval training. It's also way more time efficient. So in our busy lives, much easier to do and fit into our lives. There's the best types of weight training. What we want to have a goal is building compact, explosive muscles. There's what's called a super slow lifting protocol. So it's not necessarily that we just have to lift heavy and fast all the time, but sometimes taking a long period of time where we're doing just a few multi-joint exercises with relatively higher weights, but doing each one relatively slowly, can actually have some really good impacts. So this is one of the super slow lifting protocol as described by this doctor. He includes an upper body push, an upper body pull, a lower body push, and a lower body pull. So those different exercises, it's also really functional. We keep our bodies moving in the ways that we want to be able to use them. There's also what's called the scientific 7-minute workout. It's a high intensity body weight circuit that was featured in the New York Times, where each exercise is performed for 30 seconds with 10 seconds of rest between the exercises. So it actually goes by really quickly. All of the exercises except the wall sits are performed as explosively as possible. And remember that depending on where you're coming in at from an exercise and activity level, you can always scale the exercise so that it's something you can do. Because for some people, doing a jumping jack might feel like it takes the full toll of them. So maybe just doing the arm motion or just the leg motion part of it. But here are the exercises. So it would be going through each of these, like I said, with that rotation of some time on with that rest period, and that entire sequence would be done in 7 minutes. For weight loss, the most important thing when we look at exercise and weight loss and biohacking is being regular with the activity. We want to stay supple and limber. Like I said, taking time for active recovery through massage and rolling. Also, using our bodies functionally and learning things that are new with our bodies really challenges you physically, but it also challenges you mentally. So, the neural connections that we make are really helpful. We want to eat regularly as well, because that helps to control how our body responds to exercise and activity, and use specifically timed exercises. Eating and cold exposure therapy can all help with weight loss. So, speaking of food, let's look at diet and nutrition. Nutrition is a cornerstone of naturopathic medicine and biohacking. That shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone here. I often get asked for people who are wanting to look at biohacking, what diet should I do? What's the best diet for me? And I always say it depends on what your diet goals are. Are you looking for more physical performance, building muscle density? Is there a specific disease we're going after? Is it more anti-aging? Is it weight loss? Because no one diet is going to fit all people, and really being mindful and cognizant of the goal that you're trying to achieve with the diet will help you find the right diet. This is why, you talk to your neighbor who's doing a new diet and that's working great for them, and you try it and you feel like not getting good response, you feel tired, fatigued, hungry, all of these different things. It might just not be the right diet for what your body needs. So I'm going to focus on a couple of different diet types that are really trendy right now, and both go over the benefits of those diets as well as some of the drawbacks. The first one is ketogenic. And actually, I'm going to take a moment to just share a bit of a personal spotlight with the ketogenic diet. One of the things that got me so interested in biohacking when I was in naturopathic medical school, I was 25 and eating a relatively balanced paleo diet. Yes, I was in school, so I was sitting a lot, but I also worked out, went for walks, all of this type of thing. Was trying to practice what I preach, and I decided to do some blood work. So I was 25, did some blood work, and lo and behold, my blood numbers looked like I was pre-diabetic, and I was shocked. I was like horrified that this was showing up this way. So, given some of the other pieces that I knew about my health and about my family health, I knew that diabetes ran really strongly in my family. And I decided to actually do a ketogenic diet pretty strictly for a number of years. Totally balanced my blood sugar. I went from looking pre-diabetic to kind of having great looking numbers. And then since then, I was able to then slowly kind of scale back from the intensity of the keto diet that I was doing, and now don't have to kind of have that same rigor. But I do notice that if I stray too far, I will actually start seeing my numbers just track back up. So having a good understanding about what's happening inside your body and how your body is responding to the diet is really important. So what is ketogenic? Ketogenic diet focuses on ketosis. It's associated with those who live in blue zone areas, as well as a much more kind of ancestral hunter-gatherer tribes. What we're trying to achieve is low processed sugars, frequent fasting, a high plant intake, and modest protein with whole food fats. Some of the things that I really hate when it comes to keto is people will say things like, you can do keto anywhere. Look at, I just went to 7-Eleven and I bought a pepperoni stick and a hunk of orange cheese. And I'm like, that is not stuff that I think would be part of a healthy diet, let alone a keto diet. So what we want to focus on is that keto diet doesn't mean that you're eating bad fats and a lot of animal protein, especially like not great quality animal protein. We still really want to focus on plant foods first instead of those high protein animal foods, but we want to balance that out and use an ample amount of healthy fats, including avocados, olive oil, MCT, different nuts and seeds. And like I said, the animal sources of fats need to be clean. So grass-fed, organic, not antibiotic laden. You need to really be careful about what types of fat you're eating, because the fats are oftentimes where a lot of the chemicals and toxins are stored. So if you're eating a lot of unclean or animals that have been exposed to a lot of different toxins, actually that toxicity is going to be stored in the animal tissue. It's also important with the keto diet to potentially look at some of these key things: choline, electrolytes, and creatine. There's different pieces that we might need to either supplement or different kind of things to look out or as downfalls. Sometimes when people are trying to do a low carb keto diet, they can experience something called keto flu. And keto flu is that you feel like you're getting sick and you're tired and you're not kind of actually getting into ketosis. So a lot of people think they're doing a keto diet when they start, but unless you're actually tracking out whether you're producing ketones, whether that's through blood or urinary ketones, or you're actually counting your macros and ensuring that you're hitting exact targets through weighing and measuring your food, I would say that a lot of times people are actually not doing a true keto diet. They're just doing a low carb diet. Not that that's a bad thing. I just always think it's important to educate yourself and understand what you're doing. Also, if you start doing a keto diet and you're not either feeling good or you're not losing weight, or your cholesterol numbers are spiking, it could be because you have some genes that are making it more problematic for you to have that diet, or you're a poor converter of fats. So being aware that this diet doesn't work for everyone, but can work really well for some. The second diet I want to look at is called carnivore. So this is an all meat diet. Essentially, it's animal proteins first, and then you potentially can add in some other limited amounts of other nutrients like eggs, or in some cases, there are certain types of vegetables. There's a couple of big proponents in the biohacking community right now with carnivore. I really don't think about carnivore diet being a long-term lifestyle choice. One of the problems I see is that it can disrupt the gut microbiome due to the lack of fibers, and it's rare for humans to sustain that. So we don't have a lot of data on people historically actually staying in carnivore diet for a long period of their lifespan. And you can see some other issues. Usually it's higher in protein and lower in fats than the keto diet that I mentioned. But it is possible for people to feel really good. I've had some patients that do this for a short period of time as a different type of gut reset, and they get great energy, less brain fog, less bloating. So it can be helpful. Some of the things I found make it more successful are actually including some small amounts of root vegetables and tubers. You want to skip the skins in that case because that's where you can get some of those fibers. Some people who tolerate certain types of yogurts can use some fermented foods in yogurts. You can also potentially use small amounts of antioxidant rich berries as well. So these are some of the pieces that I've seen can actually make a carnivore diet more successful if that's something that you're looking at doing. The next trendy diet, and the last one that I want to spotlight here, is plant-based diet. So this would be your vegetarian or vegan diet, kind of the total opposite of the first two that we just talked about. So increased red meat has been linked to increased risk of diabetes, heart disease, cancer, death in some cases. And so some people turn towards more of this plant-based diet. I think one of the important things is that I've seen with most patients is that in general, I think that most diets should have a heavy plant ratio, except for carnivore, but most diets should have a heavy plant ratio. And we forget that sometimes. It's not just vegetarian diets that should have a high plant intake. And the number of people who I talk to that have a vegetarian diet that's actually a high carb intake, or a high flour and soy intake, astounds me sometimes. So there's some recommendations here in terms of how to limit protein with plant-based diets. And then here are some major deficiencies that we are more likely to see when you're doing a plant-based diet. So really being conscious that your iron's not dropping, B12 isn't dropping, maybe supplementing with some of these nutrients if needed. But there can be some really great evidence for eating more plant-based nutrients as well. Which brings us to this biohacking pillar number 4 of nourishment. Biohacking the diet can best be determined based upon your goals, on your microbiome status, your health, food intolerances, genetics, and many more things. So it's not that there's any one right diet. There's a host of different diet options, and figuring out some of the things that you're looking for will help determine which diet is going to be best for you. Our next section here is on toxic exposures. There is a lot of different places that we get toxins exposed in the environment. This is a list of a couple of them. Some of them are more controllable, like dental work, the types of things we choose to do, our water quality, whether we've got mold in our environments, whether we choose to use more plastics or heated plastics. These are all things that we can control to try and minimize our toxic exposure. Some things we're going to get exposed to a little bit more just because of the environment that we live in, being more urban, and having more chemicals in the air today, unfortunately. So on the flip side, making sure that we have good detoxification functions, making sure that our toxins are not accumulating in our tissues, and that our detox mechanisms are really working. There's our liver has two phases of detox that it goes through: phase one and phase two. Sometimes one of the phases can work better than the other, and we can have simple detoxification strategies like drinking more water and simplifying our diet to provide more bowel rest. These types of things can actually make a big difference. And also doing a bit of that reset where you're being more cognizant about what your exposures are can make a significant impact with your overall health. Also being aware of community, which is this is a quick spotlight on how toxic environments, both those that actually have chemical toxins, but also being around toxic people, our community so impacts so many of the other pillars that I've just said. If we're around the right people, they promote us to nourish ourselves better, to move, to sleep better, to eat better. So all of those things, we really want to make sure we're supported by our community and not being drawn into activities that maybe don't promote such a healthy lifestyle. And this is the last part of the biohacking, the pillars of biochemistry that I mentioned. So, biochemistry is about finding out what's happening inside your body through both clinical symptoms and specialized testing. Understanding what health systems and organs are involved and how to optimize them really gives us the tools to know what we need to do and how best we can do it. This is also the piece that I think is hardest to do on your own. Those first five pillars, I think you have a lot of capability to do on your own, and I think that this one is a bit harder as an individual to kind of source the resources to do. So at Integrative, we've got a specific biohacking program. These are the two different levels. There's what's called Plunge and Elite. They all involve working with myself, and one of the elite level involves working with our nutritionist as well. I take people through a full assessment of many of the different aspects that we just talked about in terms of the biohacking pillars. And then I also use some specialized testing. You can see that the plunge has all of the things in the plunge are also in the elite. The elite just adds on more markers here. So I'm going to actually take you through what some of this testing, why we use it, and what information it tells us. So the first type of testing that we do is blood work. So blood work looks at basic nutrients, inflammation markers, gives us some information on hormones. We'll then look at a couple of other specialized tests, but I've got a couple of slides on each of them individually. The first thing, the blood markers, we get a sense of how much inflammation is in your body. What does your immune system look like through your white blood cell counts? Is there any indication that there might be some sort of hidden infection or pathogen? And then also a bit more detail in terms of thyroid beyond the markers that would typically be ordered through your family doctor or MSP. And those then I correlate with the other factors that we see on the other testing. And that's really where I see the strength of this program, is that we get a lot of factors all together, and then I can use them together to comprehensively create a plan. We're not acting on one or two markers, we're acting on a whole grouping, and there's way more power to that grouping as a whole. The second test that I really like to use, and I include in both levels of the program, is called the Dutch hormone test. This is a dried urine test. It looks at both hormone levels, so sex hormones, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, DHEA. It actually has 35 different hormone analytes that it looks at. And then it also looks at adrenal function. So those are the two different parts that are assessed through the Dutch. The adrenal is also taken at multiple times during the day. So you actually get 4 different times of day collection, so that we see what the cortisol is doing through the day and get an idea of what's happening at night. Great in terms of indicating sex hormone and stress balance. And then also gives us an idea of if there's an imbalance there, what do we do about it? The second test, which we do, which is a specialized kit and is in both parts of the program, is something called organic acids. So, organic acids are chemicals that are excreted in the urine as products of metabolism. These are acids that contain carbon and hydrogen. They also might contain some other nutrients in it. And by looking at them, we can get a sense of upstream what's happening with how our body is digesting. Is there a good gut brain connection? Because that has many health implications. It's a really simple urine collection and it gives us that metabolic snapshot. So I really find that the oat test is useful for giving me a sense of, is there overgrowth of yeast or bacteria in the digestion? Is there some sort of problem with metabolism? Oh, maybe that's the reason you're not losing weight, because there's an issue with that microbiome. Is there a detoxification issue? Like I said, there's 2 phases of detoxification, phase 1 and phase 2. Excuse me here. And are we struggling with some of that detoxification? As well, is there some sort of nutrient or neurotransmitter imbalance? All of those are indicated on the organic acids test. Now, when it comes to genetic health and DNA testing, that is a bit more specific and only part of the elite program. I think awareness around our genetic risk factors allows us to make more informed decisions about what food, exercise, supplements, how they're going to be tolerated, and how our bodies are going to respond. It almost gives us a roadmap on what to be wary of in terms of future disease and health complications. So we can modify our environment and choices to potentially modify the outcome. There's this saying that genes load the gun, but environment pulls the trigger. So you can see that we can have our genes, but the environment and the combination of the genes come together to provide what's called the phenotype. The phenotype is what actually happens. So knowing our genes allows us to actually control the environment, which actually can control how our genes are expressed. And I think that that's really important, because then we can target out what choices we make, or at least if we're going to make certain, maybe less healthful choices, how much risk does that actually put us at? The DNA company that I really like to use is called DNA Power. DNA Power looks at over 200 different genetic variations. And in those variations, it actually gives us actionable data with insights into nutrition, fitness, lifestyle, and detoxification. They're a Canadian company with privacy protection, unlike a lot of the US DNA testing, which doesn't have privacy protection. As Canadians, we're not covered by that. And I really like DNA Power because it gives us that comprehensive overview of what the genes are, but also how are they actually relevant to our health. Because knowing, the individual, what are called SNPs, or the individual kind of gene mutation on its own, for most of us who maybe don't have a strong background in genetics, that doesn't have actual kind of actionable information associated with it. So, having gone through some of the ways in which I actually gather the data, I now want to take a couple of minutes and go through a couple of kind of patient cases, a couple of spotlights on how I apply this data that I get, and then what we do in terms of how it makes it easier for me to treat them. So the first patient here that came to me, he was male, 30s, entrepreneur, kind of go, 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 but he wanted to improve his strength and energy. When we did his baseline testing, some of the big pieces that came up: super high stress, imbalanced cortisol curve, and he actually, for his age, was already showing some age-related changes with DHEA, testosterone, and estrogen levels being higher than they should have been, that were really linked or indicative of some other hormone changes we wouldn't expect to see in a man in his 30s. So this really spotlights that Dutch test that I mentioned. So we get a look at what's happening with the adrenal hormones. We'll see how that HPA axis that we talked about earlier in the presentation is really essential for how we feel. If that HPA axis is not regulating properly, we can feel pretty lousy. We addressed the cortisol pattern with him and really understanding what was happening, when it was high, when it was low, how that was impacting his sleep, allowed me to give the right supplement recommendations and also lifestyle recommendations around that. And then we also saw that both the sex hormones, both DHEA, which is produced by the adrenals, as well as a lot of the testosterone, really was impacting this guy's health. So many health complaints begin as our hormone levels start to drop in our 30s and 40s, and they really kind of continue decreasing into our 50s. Men can also struggle with hormones in a different way than women do, but we talk about men and hormone issues not as frequently. And hormone replacement therapy can be used to optimize these levels and improve overall longevity and wellness. The second case was a woman in her 50s, same kind of executive type. She came because of hot flashes, anxiety, and weight. So, if we wanted to take a band aid solution, we might have been like, okay, let's throw her on some estrogen and we're done. But when we did and put her on a diet, tell her to exercise more, right, for the weight. When we did some of her testing, we saw that yes, she was getting some of these hormone changes, dropping estrogen and progesterone that looked like they were associated with her age. But we also saw that there was some things going on with the thyroid. So if we had looked at just fixing the sex hormones and hadn't touched the thyroid, we wouldn't see that we were getting as good a result. And then we also saw that there was a bunch of stuff happening with her gut. So that oat test showed us that there was a lot of yeast overgrowth and there was a lot of bacterial overgrowth. And that was causing a lot of this bloating and weight resistance. So if we didn't address that, she's not going to probably lose the weight, even if we put her on a more restrictive diet. And that change in the biochemistry of the gut can really impact mood. So just a spotlight here on thyroid function. Like I said, it works so closely with the adrenals. We don't want to forget about the thyroid. And looking at a couple of things that we can do to support the thyroid. Tyrosine is a great nutrient. And then exercise actually really naturally starts to promote testosterone and lean muscle mass. So kind of not forgetting about these two important factors. Like I said, the gut in this case was super important. So this is just lists out some common gut issues that you might experience, or you might have friends and family who complain about these issues. Being aware of what's going on in the gut really layers on how much the gut can impact other pieces of inflammation levels. Not just obviously kind of weight concerns, but also that anxiety component that I mentioned. My last patient that I want to spotlight, which will take me into a little conversation on brain health before we wrap up the presentation, I open up to a couple of minutes of questions, was another patient, male in his 40s. He really was getting all this brain fog and low mood. So first of all, on the DNA genetic testing here, we saw that he was having some really bad times metabolizing carbohydrates. His body had a strong genetic fat preference and a higher protein need than average. We were also seeing how much he had this really irregular sleep schedule, and that irregular sleep schedule was badly impacting his brain function. And then also there was a fair amount of toxicity happening with low glutathione, which is involved in the phase 2 liver detox. And there was also neurotransmitter imbalance here. So cognition, there's many things to focus on, but usually what we're looking at are there things that are causing more of that central nervous system fatigue? Is there something going on with the blood-brain barrier? And are we actually eating the right food to fuel our brain? So like I said, in this case of this gentleman, he was giving himself carbs, which his brain wasn't using properly to fuel itself. Central nervous system fatigue occurs when there's significant changes in the concentration of neurotransmitters. So the level of different types of neurotransmitters, those that are considered more excitatory and those that are more calming, are really imbalanced. There are four major neurotransmitters that we think about. There's more than that, but the four big ones are dopamine and acetylcholine. They're more of our motivating, stimulating, wakefulness neurotransmitters. And on the flip side, GABA and serotonin are more of our calming, relaxing neurotransmitters. So looking at the balance between these can be really key. There's actually another fun quiz that you might want to take a look at. There's a quiz called the Braverman Health Assessment. If you Google that, you'll be able to come up with a true, false, yes, no kind of questionnaire that gives you an indication on what's happening with neurotransmitter levels, what your more dominant type might be. Our brains typically have a preference for driving our function through certain types of neurotransmitters, or what your deficiencies might be. And then we can kind of look to support that with different foods and nutrients as well. So what we want is obviously a healthy brain and not a leaky brain. Healthy neurotransmitter levels can be really supported by doing things like limiting stimulants, avoiding toxins, avoiding excess antidepressants. Obviously, antidepressants can be really important, but not overusing them or using kind of too many different types of antidepressants all at once. Addressing the gut and eating the right foods. Things that can really damage our blood-brain barrier integrity. So that's the actual kind of there's a barrier between our brain and our body. We can see that things can pass the blood-brain barrier, especially poor sleep, excess alcohol, and high blood pressure can really beat up the blood-brain barrier. And then really promoting, controlling stress, controlling inflammation, controlling toxins, all of those things are going to lead us towards having a healthier brain, not a leaky brain. And here are just some other pieces around how do we actually assist in improving that blood-brain barrier integrity. Something can be looking at excess fats and not doing too much unhealthy fats, doing healthy fats instead, really promoting that parasympathetic nervous system, as I mentioned, controlling what's happening with food. Fasting is one of the best ways at helping keep a healthy brain. So you can use the time overnight to actually create a bit of a fasted state, which can really help with brain integrity, and supporting it with the right nutrients and substances. But the last thing I want to cover off is cold immersion therapy, because I brought it up a couple of times throughout the presentation, and it's something that's really easy to start doing yourself. It's a little chilly, but it can definitely be useful across a couple of different reasons here. It can help with your brain integrity, but cold thermogenesis is any strategy that helps to cool our bodies. So it restores the blood-brain barrier integrity by increasing blood flow and nitric oxide delivery to the brain. It can actually support cellular longevity. We've seen that immune health, heart health, promoting rapid fat loss, and suppressing appetite and strengthening the vagus nerve connection between the brain and the gut can really all happen because of cold exposure therapy. How can you use or do cold therapy? Cold soaks. So I try and get out into nature about once a week and do a little bit of forest bathing alongside actually getting into a chilly stream or river or lake. Cold showers, I try and do daily, even if it's just 10 seconds at the end of your shower after you've blasted yourself with hot. That kind of stimulation really stimulates the circulation and constriction. You can wear cooling different body gear. There's ice vests and things like that you can get. Keeping your ambient temperature in your bedroom cooler also helps with improving how you sleep at nighttime. So lots of different ways to use cold therapy. I've got a blog article about this, so feel free to check that out on the Integrative website as well. But the more important thing is exposing yourself to the cold more often can be really beneficial. So just to wrap it up here, our summary, what did we cover today? We looked at the history and a definition of what biohacking is. I covered off those 6 different pillars of biohacking. We talked about a couple of different areas of your lifestyle, your hormones, digestion, genetics, and cognition that we can really look at how we hack those different areas. And I introduced you to the idea of what we're doing at the Integrative Biohacking Program, and talked to you about a couple of different patient success stories. All those patients patients, through identifying the different triggers, we actually resulted in them feeling a lot healthier and happier, and saw a lot of the markers actually improve in some retesting as well. So the strategies on which supplements and what the lifestyle changes obviously were individual, but the way I use my thinking and the different testing to get there kind of looked at that wide catch. And I think that's, like I said, a place where working with a health professional can be really helpful. There's a couple of references here for you, so lots of details for you. And I'm happy to open this up right now to any questions. So I'm going to just take a look. I think that if you guys have any questions, there should be a way of you sending me a chat message, and I should be able to see that. So I know we're kind of right at the end of our 7:30 stop here, but if you have any questions, feel free to message them in the chat now, and I'd be happy to answer them. Otherwise, I hope that you guys enjoyed that presentation. I know that it kind of started, once we got rolling, it started to go by pretty quickly. Also, if anything that we've talked about has got you interested in actually booking a biohacking consultation, feel free to get in touch. Yeah, I'm getting a question in regards to our cost range for testing. So one of the reasons why we actually tried to kind of, you can do the testing on its own. So depending on if it's just some of the simple blood markers, we might be talking a couple $100. The DNA testing that I mentioned, DNA Power, their kit is $499 now. And so that, like I said, gives a really great wide range of information all at once. But I think that there's more power in doing all of the testing at a set interval so they're able to inform each other. I'm getting a question about microcurrent technologies. Yeah, depending. I'm not sure which types of microcurrent therapies you're thinking about. Yeah, if in case you want to. Oh, so I don't use a lot of Healy specifically. It hasn't been a big piece for what I've been exposed to, but I do see that doing different frequency therapy can be beneficial sometimes, can make a difference in terms of circulation, blood flow, looking at stress management as well. Oh, I'm glad that you enjoyed the presentation. I hope I didn't go into too much detail. I know sometimes I can start geeking out about it. So. All right. Well, if that's kind of starting to wrap things up, I'm really glad that you guys were able to join us tonight. Like I said, if you've got other questions that come up, you're going to get some information and a link from us as being a participant here. And if there are other specifics you've got about biohacking, we'd love to hear from you. But I will otherwise have a great night, and hopefully I will see or connect with you guys soon. Thanks so much.